At the height of the COVID pandemic, nearly 2 million Canadians lost their jobs, according to CBC News in May of 2020, leaving many people to search for ways to reinvent themselves in order to cope both economically, emotionally, and mentally as well. You can count Craig Colby as among the crowd of people who fell into this category. At the height of the pandemic, his work disappeared. He marked the time by wearing a baseball cap each day and posting a story about it on social media. A community of Colby's friends started sharing their hats and their own stories, and after 125 days, he ran out of hats. But he gained a community of people, and what each cap told him about his own life. He turned the experience into a book known as All Caps, and he joined me this week to tell me more about his journey through COVID, what inspired him to write the book, and so much more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Craig, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about All Caps and your personal and professional journey, my friend. Great to see you this morning, and happy Canadian Thursday, my friend.
Kevin, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am a big fan of your background right now.
Well, thank you. As I told you before we got started, I aim to please, my friend,
and you are a marksman.
Well, thanks so much, and I know that the sort of impetus to write All Caps, your book, about your hat collection came out of COVID, and it came out of creating a community on social media, so I'm wondering if you could tell me all about it.
Yeah, well, when the pandemic hit and we were all shut down, like everybody else was kind of figuring out what to do, all my work disappeared. I'm a television producer, director, writer, executive producer. There wasn't much of that going on. So every day I sat at my computer facing that way, and I've got over to this side a bunch of my hats hanging in a rack. And about a week in, as I was sitting there thinking, I looked at the hats and thought, I've got all these hats. I'm going to wear a different one every day until we get to be together. And then I took a picture of it and posted it on Facebook. Didn't really think anything of it. There's a lot I didn't know. I didn't know if anyone would care. I didn't know how long the lockdown was. I didn't know how many hats I had. But a funny thing happened. People started sharing their hats, putting their hats in the link. And then every day I'd put up a new hat, and I'd be connected to all these people who had these hats they had an affection for. And then I started sharing stories about my hats. So in this time when we were all isolated, I was connected both to other people and to myself and my history. And it was very grounding in an unsettling time. It was a great way to start my day and to continue the day with connections to other people. As it went on, and we were still apart, and my hats became more and more displayed, I was starting to worry that I would be known in my professional circle as that crazy hat guy. So I started worrying about the effect it would have. But a funny thing happened. After I ran out of hats 125 days later, I started getting all these notes of people telling me how sad they were that it was over. and how much it had meant to them. This wasn't just the people participating. This was people who had just read it, not even commented. My wife's cousin said that it had replaced the horoscope as the first thing she read in the morning. So at that point, I started getting encouragement to write a book. And I got to admit, I didn't see it at first, but enough people encouraged me and they saw it that I thought, well, there might be a market here. And I started seeing what the story could be. And also my mother asked me to do it. It's hard to say no to your mom. My mom's 87. She'd written for the paper for 25 years. She put out her own book. She loved everything that went with that. My younger brother had written a bestseller with PK Subban's dad, Carl Subban, called How We Did It. My mom loved everything that went around that. So I knew that she would love this and wanted me to have it. So that's when I decided to write the book.
Yeah, absolutely. You can never say no to mom, right?
You have to have a pretty good reason, right?
Absolutely. Greg, you mentioned it in your last answer, but I'm curious to dive into the sense of community that was created by writing the book and what you learned about yourself throughout the process.
Sorry, what did I learn about myself or what did I learn about the community?
We'll go both ways. What did you learn about yourself and what did you learn about the community you created?
Well, with myself, I'm not sure how much I learned during the process of the Big Hat Marathon, as I call it. It's hard to remember. That was I've been through a lot. Certainly writing the book and figuring out the story and going through each hat, I learned how disconnected I was when I was young, when we moved to Canada from Michigan, and how that had stayed with me and how important the connections were to me. I learned that about myself. It certainly explains why a lot of people have moved around in their career, and I tended to stay in one spot as long as I can. And I've never moved out of Toronto. I could go back to the States and work. I'm dual citizen, but it's never entered my mind. What I learned about other people is how important that connection is. I think I already knew that, but I never really saw it as much. I learned certainly about individuals in my group. There's a friend of mine, Jim Nottingham. I've never met him. He's a Vietnam vet in Texas. We met arguing with a distant cousin of mine about politics. And the hats he shared were all these Vietnam veteran hats. And, he has talked since then about how poorly received the soldiers were when they came back from Vietnam. And I had heard that, but I never heard that first person. But when he put his hats up, everybody thanked him for his service. I know that was good for him because he stayed in the game. He pulled things out of his garage to share when he ran out of hats. So that was really touching for me to see how a little community like this can make a difference to people. He's shared his story since then too. He's written things up that are really touching and beautiful. So, I've always known about the importance of connection, but really seeing it firsthand was pretty inspiring and pretty moving and comforting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that during COVID that you experienced some loss in your life, and that also went through, that also contributed rather to you wanting to write the book. So tell me about it.
Well, I think the losses you're talking about didn't happen during COVID. They happened earlier in my life. They're documented in the book pretty well. When I was 42, I lost my best friend to suicide. One of the reasons the book is structured the way it is, it starts pretty happy. My friend Dave is in chapter 3. He was really the first reason I felt at home in Canada, that friendship. I felt like I belonged somewhere. And, throughout the book, you see that friendship develop in a lot of ways that male friendships often do, through sports and events, sort of shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. So I think exploring that loss is an important discussion to have with people. my hope is that people will look at this book and then see themselves in it, look at their own relationships. What if that was me? What if that was my best friend? How would I feel? How do I feel about these friendships that I have now? So I talked about that. I talked about losing my job, which happened before COVID, which, was something I wanted, but still as a man in his 50s, and I'm sure women feel the same way. I shouldn't characterize it by gender, but well, maybe a little bit, because, in my generation, we were all raised to take care of the family. That was sort of the underlying message of manhood. And when you lose your job, even if you wanted it, which you did, even if you were well taken care of by the company, which I was, that affects the way you see yourself. So those are a couple of them. There's more. I don't want to give it all away. If you want to bring up some of the things you can, but those are some of the things we explore in the book. It's there's a lot of laughs in it, but there are some tears too, and that's what life is, right?
Yeah, well, that's a good teaser for people to buy the book, right?
Yeah, yeah, and the response to the book has been pretty great. As I said, my hope was that people examine their own lives, and they have. And my hopes were that people would laugh and cry, and they have. I hear that all the time. So,
well, it's important to make a difference, isn't it?
I'm trying.
Absolutely. And throughout the process of writing the book and promoting it, I know that you've been able to meet some of your childhood sports sort of heroes, and you've had experiences floating like an astronaut. So I know it's been a whirlwind for you. So tell me about some of the people you've met and some of the experiences that you've had.
Well, those things didn't happen during the writing of the book. Those things happened in my television career, but those were great experiences. I'll tell you two of them. One is the sports hero. I'm a huge Detroit Tiger fan, as you may have guessed by just looking behind me a little bit. Those are Tiger bobbleheads, and that is a picture of Al Kaline up there. And Al Kaline was everybody's hero when we were growing up in Michigan. My brother went to the gas station to try to get his baseball card so often. It was his quest. So when I started working at TSN, one of my quests was to try to meet Al Kaline. So I was working at TSN on sports desk. And at the time, the Blue Jays were heading for their World Series run. And they had a player named John Olerud who went straight from college baseball to the majors, like Al Kaline had. So I pitched a story about players who had gone straight to the majors and the different circumstances under which that had occurred throughout baseball history. And of course, Al Kaline was a bonus baby at the time. If you paid a certain amount to get a player, you had to start them right away. So that's why Al Kaline went straight to the majors. So I arranged for an interview with him. I sold the story. They said, go ahead and do it. I called Al Kaline's room at the Sky Dome Hotel, which is where they stayed at the time. And I remember the phone ringing and I thinking, boy, it can't be this easy. I shouldn't be able to do this. And he picked up the phone and said hello. And I introduced myself and asked for the interview. And there was a little pause and he said, sure, meet me outside the batting cage at 6:00. So, I went down to Sky Dome. I think I might've already been there. I had my suit and shirt on. It was 1:00 or something like that in the afternoon. No media shows up that early for the game. But I called the assignment desk and said, get me a press pass. Have him put it there right away. Super over eager. And I went down and I got the press pass and I went down on the floor of the Sky Dome and just waited for like 5 hours. There was the grounds crew came out. I remember Jack Morris doing some warm-ups and he was sort of looking at me, trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing there. It was not usual for someone to behave the way I did. And so, the grounds crew started to fill in, and then the players and the press and the field started to fill up, and they opened the dome, and I ran into one of my colleagues and he asked what I was doing there. I wasn't there all the time. Usually I was in the office, in the studio, working on sports desk. And I told him. He was very excited for me. So 6:00 comes, no Al Kaline. 6:05, no Al Kaline. And my colleague said, well, maybe you should go in and look for him. And I said, no, Al Kaline said, that he would be here, and he will. At about 6:10, I see Al Kaline pop out of the Tigers dugout. And I went to walk over, and then I paused for a minute and I thought, right now, Al Kaline is thinking, I wonder where Craig Colby is. I thought that was just the coolest thing. So I walked up to him and stuck up my hand and said, hi, Al, I'm Craig Colby. And he said, oh, I was just looking for you. How gratifying that was to the little 5-year-old boy inside of me. So we walked over and I chatted with him about Baltimore. He'd just come from Baltimore. He said he'd seen his parents. Of course, I knew he was from Baltimore. We did the interview, and the part I liked best about it was what a professional he was as a broadcaster. No surprise to anyone who saw him play baseball. That's just who he was. So he looked at me. He's taller than me. He looked down at me for my asking the question, and then he looked up and gave me a look off camera as if I was about a foot taller, and gave me this great eye line with these incredibly good, eloquent, thoughtful answers. And we did the interview, and I thanked him. I had a baseball card of his in my wallet for years, hoping I could meet him and get him to sign it. There was no way I was going to ask him to sign that card, because that's a very unprofessional thing to do. And what was cherished to me is there's a lot of people who have his autograph. I do now. A friend of mine sent it to me. Actually, Dave sent it to me. A lot of people have his autograph. How many people get to have a professional exchange with, one of the great sports figures in Detroit history, and someone who's meant a lot to my family? So that was a great experience that I had at work. Now, the other one was after I left TSN, I went to Discovery Channel. And it was a tough decision to make because I love sports so much, but it was probably the best decision I've ever made, because I worked on a show called At Discovery Canada and later Daily Planet. And it was a daily science news show, the only one like it in the world. So instead of meeting athletes, I met astronauts, scientists. I met Tim Berners-Lee, the man who created the World Wide Web, the reason we're able to talk right now like this. But, one of the best experiences was when Bjarne Tryggvason was going up to space, and the Canadian Space Agency decided to publicize it by having a few journalists go on this Vomit Comet out of Cleveland. The original was in Houston, but this is close enough. Out of Cleveland, and do these weightless flights, the kind they did to create Apollo 13. And the way that works is a plane flies along and then it goes up. And while it's going up, you experience like 2 Gs, and then they turn the nose over and the plane falls. And when the plane falls, everything in it falls at the same time, which simulates weightlessness. That takes about 20 seconds. So you float, and then they ring the bell, and the plane levels out, and it goes back up. It's like going on a roller coaster. We started in Cleveland, and then we flew this roller coaster over Michigan. And I went with Jill Deacon was our host. She had just started hosting. Wonderful person. Maybe the most natural person on camera I've ever seen. Just incredible. So we went up, we were trained. They taught us the proper way to throw up on a plane. You throw up in a paper bag, and then you put it in a sealed plastic baggie. And they say 2 and 3 people get sick. One gets really sick. One throws up a little bit, and one is fine. So we went up with a camera crew from Cleveland. Bjarne was terrific. We got in place. I was behind our cameraman. Jill was front and center. They ring the bell, and now we're going to be weightless. So they ring that bell, bing, 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 bing. And I see Jill start to float and Bjarne start to float and the cameraman start to float. And I feel all of my weight go. For people who wonder what that's like, if you've ever sat at the back of a roller coaster when the front is going down and you're coming up on the back and you float up out of your chair, it's like that, but not for a microsecond. So I'm floating up. I think I laughed. I'm not supposed to, very unprofessional, but you can see Jill laughing and this really showing people what this unusual sensation was like. And I felt a hand on my shoulder and somebody said, "Don't do that." And I realized I was kicking my legs as if I was in water. And kicking your legs isn't going to do anything. You can't push air enough to help you. But it was a natural reaction. I realized all I was going to do was kick people. So I think it was 51 time we went up and down and up and down. And our cameraman got really sick because looking through a lens disorients you even further. And Jill threw up a little bit. I went to ask her, set up another shot, and she just said, threw up in the paper bag, ziplocked it, and then we were off. Total pro. And then she asked me a question I've never been asked before or since by a host. Did I barf all my lipstick off? She hadn't. So, I shot some of the camera. Didn't bother me. I went upside down. Didn't bother me. Looked at the window. Didn't bother me. I've always had a really good inner ear. So I just got the beautiful sensation of weightlessness without any of the nausea. As a matter of when we finished, Jill said, "Yay, Craig makes no vomit." And then she said, capturing it perfectly, "I can't believe we'll never be weightless again." So that was one of the best days at work I've ever had. And I can thank Discovery Channel for that.
Well, it sounds like both of those experiences had quite an impact on your life, and I thank you for sharing those with me. And I'm a Tigers fan too, so I apologize for the season they're having this year, right?
We Tiger fans have been through the lean times and some of the good times. So I don't think they're that far away. Honestly, I don't think they're that far away.
Well, there's always next year, right?
Right.
Tell me, Greg, I'm fascinated to know what's your favorite hat that you own?
Oh, I don't have it with me right now because I keep it in a special place, but I've got something close. My favorite hat, and I have a newer version of this, is the Detroit Tiger Home New Era 5950 hat. I have one upstairs that I got at Detroit Tiger Fantasy Camp, and I keep it as pristine as I can, the home one and the road one. And the reason I love this hat so much is, before I got one of these, the hats we had in the 70s and 80s were horrible, just horrible. Trucker hats are in vogue now, but back they're better than they were, but it was really cheap plastic, snap back, thin mesh front. The brims didn't hold its shape. I had some hats. I had a Tiger hat that had a foam front and mesh back, and they were okay. They were, people looked at them as things you put on your head. But New Era Cap Company made the hats for the Major League Baseball players. And in 1978, they started selling them out of the back of Sporting News. I didn't know that at the time. When I came in contact with them was when I started going to Tiger games. There was a place next to Tiger Stadium called Sportsland USA. And it's hard to imagine for people now who have places like Lids, and you can see nice hats sold everywhere, but you couldn't get a nice hat anywhere. And merchandise was really hard to find of any kind. But you walked into Sportsland USA, and there were rack upon rack upon rack of these beauties in hat sizes. Like there was no snapback. You fit one to your head. They had all the Tiger home hats, road hats. They had them for, I think, every Major League Baseball team. And I splurged. I believe it was during the 84 season when they were going to the World Series. I splurged and got a really nice New Era 5950 Detroit Tiger hat. And that was the gates opening to hat heaven, because these hats, not only are they fitted, this one's a little worn, but inside is like this, I'm not sure what they call it. It's a really structured mesh that holds the crown beautifully. The stitching is raised now. It wasn't then, but it was still beautifully stitched, not stuck on or anything like that. The brim is stiff and sturdy. You can shape it. It'll hold its shape. The hats then were wool. They're not wool now. But boy, putting this on, it felt beautiful on your head. It felt like wearing art and architecture. So I always have a pristine Detroit Tiger hat, New Era 5950 Tiger hat that I have available to wear. And then the old ones I keep, depending on what state they're in, I'll wear them if it's raining or whatever. But that's my favorite. My second favorite would be the New Era 5950 Detroit Tiger road cap. But when I started going to stadiums, I started collecting them for each stadium I would go to, except for Cleveland. But that's my favorite hat. I love that hat.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me, Craig, my final question for you this morning is a two-parter. I'm curious, what is the most profound lesson that you learned about the human spirit while writing the book? And how do you think you want your overall personal and professional legacy to be defined?
I learned about the human spirit. I learned that you can handle a lot, but not everything. Right? You often hear people say that, God only gives you what you can handle. That's not true. Sometimes people have things they can't handle. And when that happens to you, you need to ask for help. I think the most important lesson people can learn in life, period, is when to ask for help. Because I know people who have and people who haven't. And the people who haven't, I've lost. So, asking for help is the great thing. I also think that people misunderstand what tough is. The toughest person I've ever seen is my son, Shane. And he had a very scary health incident that's documented in the book. And I'll tell you what made him tough. It wasn't that he didn't take any painkillers while they took out the stitches. That was pretty tough, though. It was that through all of the troubles, he was kind. He was kind to the people who were caring for him, even when it was difficult for him. I think of my friend Jill when Shane was sick. She started and we were in in Sick Kids Hospital for 5 weeks. She started a food drop off at my house where my friends put food in a cooler so we didn't have to cook. She did that while she was preparing for her second round of cancer treatment. That's tough. That is tough. So, I think the most important things that we can learn about the human spirit is the greatest gift is kindness, and you need to be kind to yourself too. You need to take care of yourself, and that all there is us and caring about each other and valuing those connections that we have to each other. That's what I've learned about the human spirit. As for my legacy, I don't know. I don't think I get to define that. I don't think I would. I really don't like labels. I think that's one I'm just going to avoid answering altogether. I've gone out there and I've done my best to try to do my best work, try to do best for people as well as I can. Not perfect. I've made my share of mistakes. I'd like to think I've owned them. And whatever people do with that, however people interpret that, that's up to them and not to me.
Fabulous. And Craig, you'll finally tell me if people want to buy the book or get connected with you personally. What's the best way they can do that?
Well, the best way to do that is through my website, colbyvision.net. And if you go to colbyvision.net/all caps, you will find every place you can buy the book. You will find links to the media I've done and interviews for it, so you can find out more about the book and more about me. There are ways there you can connect with me. You can, if you want to connect with me professionally, I'm all over LinkedIn. It's a great place to make a connection, make a contact. So yeah, if you want to buy the book, and really I hope you do, go to colbyvision.net/all caps. You can also search for all caps and my name, Craig Colby, or Colby Vision, and you will find all kinds of ways to connect with me and to the book. And I hope people do buy it, of course, for personal reasons, but I think there are things in there for people to take away too.
Well, Craig, it's a fascinating story and quite a concept. So I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for sharing your story with me and engaging in conversation. I wish you the very best for the book, and thank you for being here this morning. It's most appreciated.
Kevin, thank you so much for thinking of me and sharing me with your audience, and I really appreciate your time.